Vance Rose, welcome to virtually to the Twin Cities. Oh, you need to unmute yourself. I'm sorry.
You got me?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, as I said, I love the Twin Cities when I get to visit there. I love all the great food that's there, and I'm happy to join virtually today.
Where are you from?
I am from Austin, Texas, originally. That's where you get the redneck accent from. But I've lived in California for about 28, 29 years.
Well, I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, so you sound sophisticated to me, not redneck.
You definitely kept your Southern accent like I have, and I'm happy to hear a fellow Southerner.
I don't hear my accent at all. I think Allison and Joanna have accents, not me.
Well, definitely. Allison definitely has one. Sorry to pick on you, Allison, but you sound like you're from Minnesota.
You know, I
know.
I actually was in Austin. I think in 1981, I helped open the Hyatt Regency in Austin.
Sure.
I was there for about 3 weeks, training at the time I was the assistant corporate director of food and beverage for Hyatt Regency hotels, under assistant to Horst Schulze, who later founded Ritz-Carlton. So it was a great time in my life working with this genius visionary man. But we went to Austin to open the hotel there, and about 3 or 4 days before we were going to open the hotel, the general manager took our team out to dinner to thank us for our help. And he took us to this dive Tex-Mex restaurant. And, it didn't quite have dirt floors, but it almost had dirt floors. And we were having a shot of tequila, and this waiter walked through with this tray with sizzle plates on it with this steam and everything coming off of it. And I said to the GM, because he was local, I said, what in the world is that? He said, well, that's called a fajita. And it is a very traditional dish in this part of the world. Well, it's hard to believe, but neither Horst Schulze nor I have ever heard of a fajita at that time. And
that was the time. You're right.
He's one of the most brilliant people in food in the history of the world, and he had never heard of a fajita in 1981. Well, we ordered them, and they were so fabulous. We went back to the hotel, and 3 days before we opened the hotel, we rewrote the coffee shop menu and put fajitas on it. And I went and got about 12 of the secretaries, or administrative assistants now, but back then they were secretaries, to come to lunch the first day and order the fajitas, so all the tourists in the hotel would have the same experience I did. And we sold like 400 orders of fajitas the first day.
There's nothing wrong with a good fajita.
They were fabulous.
I still eat them.
They were fabulous, and within about 6 months, they were on every coffee shop menu in the entire hotel company, because they were such a tremendous
success. They're fantastic, and it's great. I'm sorry that I wasn't hanging out with you there in 81. I think I had left Austin in about 81 to go to Los Angeles and finish school at USC, and then came back in about 83. So I just missed that, but I actually think I was there when that Hyatt opened. So,
well, Austin and Nashville are a lot alike. They're college towns on rivers with vibrant music scenes. And I think Austin's a little more counterculture than Nashville is. A little more, Nashville's kind of Johnny Cash, and Austin's Willie Nelson kind of. And then,
that's true, but they're both great. And I love to spend time in both of those cities.
I really loved my time in Austin. I think it's a great city.
It is. I love to go back and visit often.
So talk to us about, I'd encourage everyone to pour themselves a glass of the Chardonnay. And would you talk to us about what is Routestock?
So Routestock is a brand that has actually been around for a while, and the name derives from that cross section of roots, what we call rootstock that goes into the ground. That's the part of a grapevine that you can't see. And roots, R-O-U-T-E-S, the roads that run through wine country. And so what we have done is really pretty simplistic. We've just taken the best varietals, Chardonnay, Cabernet, Pinot Noir, and we do a tiny little bit of Sauvignon Blanc. And we went to the best areas in the United States that grow those grapes. For Cabernet, it's Napa. For Chardonnay, Carneros. For Pinot Noir, it's the Sonoma Coast. And we make these wines at a more approachable and affordable price point. But the real difference here is that, you can find some inexpensive, Pinot Noirs and some inexpensive Chardonnays, but that is not what we're doing here. This is no corners have been cut with these wines. These are done very traditionally. Every wine is aged in oak barrels, predominantly French.
Dale, I'm in the middle of a Zoom tasting. Would you ask Dale if he could possibly help him? And if he can't, I will. Dale will be in here. I'm sorry. Excuse me, Vance. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. So, as I say, there are no shortcuts in these wines. We're not aging them in stainless steel tanks with little oak chips. We're not doing any of the little shortcuts that some of the other inexpensive brands do. This is premium fruit, made, fermented, aged in oak barrels and brought to the market at a more reasonable price. I mean, there's so much Napa Cabernet that is over $75 a bottle that, it's kind of sickening. And so it's hard to find a California Cabernet at a reasonable price. And it's certainly hard to find a good one at a reasonable price. And Sonoma Coast Pinot is the same thing. Pinot is a grape that's hard to grow. It's finicky. It loves cool weather, but it doesn't yield a lot. And so it's hard to make an affordable Pinot Noir that has depth and character. And part of that comes from the oak aging. And Chardonnay, the same thing. Chardonnay, which is what I have in my glass, comes from two different growers in Carneros, one on the Sonoma side, one on the Napa side. And it's a pretty simple proposition for me as a winemaker, because white wines have four basic elements. There's alcohol, oak, there's acidity, and fruit. Those are the four basic things. And so what I try to do is get those four things to come together and be equal. I don't want you to taste this wine and think, oak, or burn of alcohol. I want all of those things to go together, because I think of wine as like a ball. You put it on the tip of your tongue, it rolls to the back, and it should roll smooth and calm and not have one thing that bangs you every time it goes by. Now, there's another element in inexpensive Chardonnay that exists that doesn't exist in this, and that's sugar. None of my wines have residual sugar. There's no sweetness in there to try to fill in the palate. I want the wine to be savory, where you have a first sip and you want a second one.
Vance, I'm not sure that you may not be aware of this, but there are actually Napa Valley Cabernets these days that sell for, $4,000.
I am aware of them. And
Colgan and I went to college together. We were classmates at Vanderbilt University in the early 70s. And we've been friends a long time, and her wines are amazing, but how do you in good conscience suggest to somebody they pay $675 for a bottle of young Napa Valley Cabernet?
It doesn't make any sense to me, because wine doesn't have to be that way. I mean, wine is an experience, and it doesn't have to be an experience that sets you back, a whole paycheck or two. It should be something that you can enjoy every day of the week and not just, once a year or something at that kind of price. And I'm fortunate. I travel in those winemaking circles, and I taste a lot of those wines. And, it's just not something that I really want to drink every day. This kind of wine, like Routestock, with that balance that I'm talking about, is more fun for me to drink. And maybe because I can afford to, drink it. But it's also, it has that savory character of brightness and acidity and balance that's very important to me in wine. I'm also a chef, and creating a dish is about creating balance, and creating a wine is about creating balance as well. And that's what's important to me. And that's why I make wines this way.
So how did you go from Austin, Texas to what part of California are you actually located in?
Out the back, my backdrop here is the town of Sonoma.
Okay.
Where
so
I live.
You go from Austin, Texas to Sonoma?
One spring day in my senior year in high school in Austin, Texas, the drinking age was 18. I was 18. My dad said, pull a bottle of wine for dinner. He and his buddies had gotten into wine, and he had about 25, 30 bottles of wine in the bottom of the closet. And I went and rummaged through them and knew nothing about it. I drank wine, but I was convinced at that point there were 4 types of wine: white, red, pink, and bubbles. And that all, within those categories, they were all the same. So I rummaged through there, and there was one bottle in there from my birth year, 1959. And it was written in French, and I had no idea what it said, but hey, it was my birth year. We had that bottle of wine that night, and it truly changed my life.
You remember
went to
what
the
wine
library
was?
the next day and read all the books on wine, subscribed to the 2 kind of magazines. One was the newspaper, the first version of the Spectator, and the other one was Decanter. And I became a wino.
Vance, do you remember what the wine was? Was it 59 was a great vintage in Bordeaux.
Yeah. It was a Armand Rousseau Chambertin,
oh my God.
Grand Cru Red Burgundy that in hindsight really was supposed to be a great bottle of wine. But what did I know? I was an 18-year-old high school senior. I didn't know anything. And you're not telling me that you were 18 years old and you opened a 59 Armand Rousseau Chambertin. Yeah, it's a sad story,
God.
but it got me into wine, and that was more years ago than I want to tell you about. But that's why I am here. I decided in college, I went to work for a wine retailer in Beverly Hills, California, and when I finished school, I decided I really like wine. I'm going to do it as long as I have fun. I may never make any money at it, but if I'm having fun, that's good. And that's been, 38, 9 years ago. And I've had fun every day doing wine.
Do you know who Bartholomew Broadbent is?
Sure.
So he and we're really good friends. We've been friends for a long time. And I had talked to him. I did one of these conversations last night with Bartholomew about Chateau Moussard. Mm-hmm. And because I know that Bartholomew's father, Michael, started pouring first growth Bordeaux for him at dinner when he was 7 years old. And, imagine that.
That's a great lot.
Larry Stone and Bartholomew Broadbent had the most privileged childhoods of any 2 wine people ever, because Larry's parents poured him. Larry started making wine when he was in 12 years old. But I think he made whiskey first. He made whiskey as a high school science project. He made whiskey. But anyway, I asked Bartholomew, when, as a kid, tasting these amazing wines that your father was pouring for you, when did you realize you might actually have a palate for wine. And he said, we discovered that when I was 5. Well, you couldn't have, he said, here's the story. I loved orange juice. I just drank so much orange juice. My parents wanted me to drink more water. And I told them that I would drink more water if I could drink water from the faucet in the bathroom upstairs and not water from the faucet in the sink in the kitchen, because the water in the faucet in the bathroom upstairs tasted so much better. They laughed at him, but then they had a blind tasting. Michael Broadbent, the greatest wine taster ever in history, probably.
Yeah.
Michael Broadbent, his wife, I think Daphne, no, that's Bart's wife. But anyway, Bartholomew's mother and his sister and Bartholomew all blind tasted the water. 3 of the 4 of them couldn't tell the water apart, but Bartholomew could, and he much preferred the water from the tap upstairs. So his parents went up in the attic, and there were 2 water collection tanks up there that the water came from, and the one for the tap in the kitchen had a lid on it, but the one for the tap in the bathroom upstairs didn't, and there were dead pigeons floating in it.
Oh my gosh. Oh.
Bartholomew preferred the water that had the dead pigeons floating in it.
You know, I'm
least that's
sure
what he
it
said last
tasted
night.
better.
So, I mean, that is I think I've been doing this a long time. That's the craziest story I've ever heard.
I think you're right. I don't know of any story that could top it.
He may have swapped it intentionally just to make the story better.
Sure.
But he claims that he preferred the water with the dead pigeons floating in it. And I don't know that how you survive drinking water with dead pigeons floating in it at 5 years old. That seems like something that would be fatal.
You got to have a great constitution, and 5-year-old kids are resilient. What the heck?
Yeah. But they imagine that his father couldn't tell the difference and he could.
Yeah, that's a palate.
Yeah. And then famously at the London Bordeaux Wine Fair, when Serge Hochar Serge's father poured the Chateau Musar for Michael, he handed the glass to Bartholomew, who was, I think, 18. And Bartholomew said, "This is the greatest wine I've ever tasted," having drunk first growth Bordeaux his whole life. So,
yeah.
The rest is history. So
the rest is history.
So talk to us about the Chardonnay. I mean, you have a little bit, but
yeah. So as I said, Chardonnay is really, I don't like Chardonnay that's exaggerated in one way or another. Too much oak, too much butterscotch, too fat, too sweet. It's just, it needs to be all in there together, and it needs to have enough acid, enough brightness to be lively on the palate, to stand up to food, and to be savory where you want that second sip and that second glass. And that really is just a matter of getting these 4 basic elements of Chardonnay all wrapped in there together. And it sounds simple, but it's hard. You have to grow it the right way and age it the right way and make it the right way. But it is something that it just requires piecing it together with those 4 elements to make it right. I don't want it heavy, but I don't want it light. I don't want it fat and creamy, but I don't want it battery acid either. You got to find that middle where you put those 4 things together to make it right. And it's very fun for me. I haven't had this 17 vintage in probably 7 or 8 months, and it's really fun for me to have it. The wine is really great. It has that midway where it's not heavy but not light. It has a really great long lingering finish that I love, and that really comes from aging in oak barrels like I talked about. You can't get a wine with that kind of lingering aftertaste doing it in stainless steel tanks. It has to be an oak. to get that. And we use mostly neutral oak, a little bit of once used oak, and about 12% of new oak to give it, a little bit of that toasty character, but without becoming a oak plank in your mouth or a matchstick in your mouth. I just want enough of it in there to create that length and dynamic, but not dominate it.
It strikes me as, and I there's a risk that you'll be offended by this statement, but it won't be the first time I've offended somebody in the last 15 minutes. It strikes me as if Kendall Jackson decided to take the Vintners Reserve Chardonnay and make something really, really good. That's kind of what it is.
Sugar. Yeah. And I think, that is a good description, because they just kind of have that, of course they're making, 2 or 3 million cases of that. And I'm making, 3,500 cases of this. And I promise you, as a winemaker, it's easier to make 3,500 cases of good wine than 3 million cases of good wine. But, they rely on sweetness to fill out that mid palate. And I don't like that in Chardonnay. Chardonnay shouldn't be sweet. You should taste that Chardonnay fruit, but it shouldn't be sweet. It needs to be dry. And so creating that balance without that sugar that they use is harder. And but the result is a lot better, I believe.
Well, I meant that as praise.
I'll take it as praise. I like it.
I meant it that way. I think the world of Kendall Jackson, I mean, they kind of in some ways saved the California wine industry when Phylloxera was killing all the vineyards and they were the only ones that had any money. I don't know.
And they did a great job, and they continue to do a great job.
They replanted vineyards with the grapes that should have gone in those vineyards in the first place, and they replanted them with rootstock that should have been used in the first place. But they were the only ones with any money. I mean, if you're a 5 acre, I don't need to tell you this, but it's just, if you're a 5 acre farmer in Sonoma and your vineyard dies and it's going to cost you $25,000 an acre to replant it, and you're not going to make any wine for a few years, who's going to loan you the $125,000 to do that? Nobody.
It's hard. It's very, very difficult. Yeah,
but Kendall Jackson allowed people to do that.
Yeah, what a lot of people don't understand is that 96% of the vineyards in California are owned by independent grape growers. Right. Wineries only own 4% of all the vineyards in the state. So we all rely on that 5 acre or 15 acre or 50 acre independent grower to grow our fruit. And that's what we do at Routestock. This Chardonnay comes from 2 growers that I've been dealing with personally for about 12 years. And then we've been for Routestock buying fruit from them for the past 6 vintages in a row. And so it's a very consistent source. I work with them all year long to grow the kind of fruit that we want them to grow to make the kind of wine that we want. But we rely on that grape grower to deliver us good fruit.
Well, I mean, you're not the only winery in the world that purchases grapes. Peter.
Yeah, as I say, 96% of them are owned by independent growers, and 99% of wineries are buying from those growers.
Well, Peter Sissick at Pingus buys a lot of grapes. I mean, he makes pretty good wine, right?
He does a good job, and he buys a lot of grapes.
What makes Carneros special for Chardonnay?
Carneros has kind of 2 interesting things to it for Chardonnay. And one is its proximity to San Pablo Bay, which is the northern extension of San Francisco Bay. And that water during the summer months is 56 degrees. You go a foot down in it and it's 56 degrees. So at night, everything around there becomes roughly 56 degrees. So, those grapes near that water get cool every night, and cold air sinks. It goes to the lowest point it can, and that is the bay. And then it works its way up, and that air gets warmer the higher you go, up in elevation at night and during the day. And that the fog is usually in there because of the moisture from San Pablo Bay. And normally that fog doesn't burn off till 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. And so it keeps those vines cool. And Chardonnay, like, it thrives in cooler climate. It really makes a wine that is very, very, very generic if it's grown warm. So that's the kind of the first advantage. The second advantage is the soils that run through that area are really wonderful for Chardonnay. There's a little bit of clay in there that retains some moisture, but a lot of silty loam that you would find kind of at the bottom of the ocean, because the ocean was covering Carneros for thousands of years. And so that combination of climate and soil is what makes Carneros a great area for Chardonnay. There's a lot of Pinot grown there, and I think that's grown more from a temperature standpoint than a soil standpoint. I think the Carneros is really a better Chardonnay area than it is Pinot Noir. And that's why for Pinot Noir, we really look heavily at Russian River and Sonoma Coast. And I ended up going to the Sonoma Coast because there's just a little better elevation and temperature out there, and wonderfully draining soils. Pinot Noir doesn't like to be wet, and so the roots. And so Sonoma Coast really is, in my opinion, the greatest area in all of the United States to grow Pinot Noir. And my problem is I don't have any in my glass, so I got to open my bottle.
I was really, really poor once, and I lived for several months on frozen Pet Ritz cherry pies. I would buy one and have a third of it for dinner every night, because that's all I could afford in Atlanta, Georgia. That's quite a while ago, but if my memory of what those cherry pies tasted like is somewhat correct, this wine really reminds me of it. And again, I mean that it's high praise.
Yeah. Pinot Noir is a hard grape to grow. It's very, very thin-skinned, and that makes it difficult because it's susceptible to every disease. And like I said with Chardonnay, when you grow Chardonnay hot, it makes boring wine. When you grow Pinot Noir in a warm climate, it makes worse than boring wine. It tastes worse than Gallo Hardy Burgundy. It just is not distinctive at all. So it really needs a cool climate, and it needs drainage so the roots of that vine don't stay moist, that they have to dig deeper to get that moisture. And it's funny, when I just opened this bottle and I put my nose in it, the first thing that I got was kind of that fall dried leaves that you crumble in your hands. And then the second thing I get is that red fruit, that red cherry, red raspberry brightness of fruit. And that really is what I want in Pinot Noir, that combination of that dried leaf, fall, autumnal character, and enough fruit to carry that, where it's not like you're just eating dried leaves.
Pinot Noir is often called the heartbreak grape, and there's various reasons for that. Mostly it's because any Pinot Noir under about $25 tends to be just god awful.
Yes.
It's just so hard to find a Pinot Noir that's relatively affordable, that is of much quality. This is a really lovely wine. I think our price is $20. This is a lovely wine for that price.
Yeah, I'm hard pressed, and I hate to say nice things about my own wines, but I'm hard pressed to find another Pinot Noir under 25 bucks that has half this character. This wine has a lot going on.
It does.
There is, we talked about the 4 elements in white wine. There are 5 elements in red. And that 5th element is tannin. And tannin comes from the skin of the grape. All the red grapes, all the color is in the skin. The pulp is clear. So if you peel the skin off a red grape, you would make white wine. And because Pinot Noir is that thin skin grape, it has less color. So you look at this versus Cabernet and it's much, much lighter. So it's going to have less tannin in it, but it's still an element in there. And so you're trying to balance the fruit, oak, alcohol, acidity, and tannin in this to come together. And it's hard. Pinot Noir is a hard grape to grow. I grow it. So I was in my Pinot Noir vineyard yesterday. I know, firsthand how hard it is to grow. And it grows less tons of fruit per acre than Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc or Cabernet. And so by that nature, it is more dear and more expensive. And so that's why usually you have to spend more money on a Pinot Noir to get it to be decent. And this Pinot I haven't tasted in a few months because I've been working on the 2020 blend that I'll bottle at the end of July. But man, I need to go back and start drinking this thing. This is fun. This is good wine. I enjoy
really
it.
good. It's really good. It's 3 years old, but it's got a long life ahead of it. It's not the least bit really evolved. I mean, I think it's a beautiful glass of wine.
And that I think is because of the balance of those 5 elements. If you get the balance to begin with, it goes longer. And it also, it is kind of counterintuitive to most people because we think that oxygen is bad for wine, right? If you open a bottle of wine and leave it open and it sits there for a few days, it's not very good after a few days. So oxygen is bad. And that's true, except early in a wine's life, right? During fermentation and right after fermentation for the next month or so, the more oxygen that wine gets, the stronger it is to fight oxygen off later in its life. And so I am a strong believer in that. And I give my wines a lot of oxygen during fermentation and right after fermentation so that they can stand up to oxygen later. And this wine is kind of proving that to me. But what you say, it is showing no real signs. It's showing no signs of decay. And but it is evolving and it will continue to evolve. It's fun.
I mentioned that Thursday night we had this Chateau Musar tasting with Bartholomew, and to be honest, Thursday night when an hour after I opened the bottle of 2000 Chateau Musar, I really did not like it. And I love their wines. I've tasted, I don't know, there's no telling how many different vintages I've tasted of Musar. I had a dinner at a restaurant in Nashville with Serge Hochar probably 20 years ago where we served, 25 different vintages of his wines. I love his wines, but Thursday night, this bottle of 2000 Chateau Musar, there was so much volatile acidity. I considered it completely undrinkable. I put the cork back in it, put it on my kitchen table, poured myself a glass last night, and it was absolutely magnificent.
Yeah, it's the beauty of wine. It's a living thing. It evolves, it changes, and we change too. Our mood, our perspective, where we're having a wine, who we're having it with, what it's served in, all goes into play to create that mood in our mind that wine is really good. And it used to be a thing we did years ago, about 20 years ago. You drink a wine that was really good, and then to really test it, we'd get a little, one of those kind of 2.5 ounce Dixie paper cups. And then you'd get a one of that little basic heavy white wine glass that we all had, Libby wine glass from years ago, and then get a lovely proper shaped wine glass and pour that wine in all three of them and taste it. And if it tasted great out of all three of them, that really was a great wine. If it tasted only good out of the fancy thing, then, it may be a good wine, but it wasn't good, as great as you thought. But a great wine's going to taste great, no matter what, usually.
Wine's just a lot more, there's a lot more complication to all that than, I've told the story before. I once opened a bottle of St. Urbansoft Achfelder Bachstein Cabernet for a customer at my store in Nashville, because I thought he would love the wine and want to buy a lot of it, and he did. I put the bottle, I didn't even put the cork back in the bottle. I stuck it in the cooler. Now, it was a really cold cooler, but I stuck this bottle open in the cooler and forgot about it. And about 6 months later, I noticed it.
Oh my gosh.
I poured myself a glass and it was absolutely magnificent. And it had been open for 6 months.
And that wine with that low level 8.5%, 9% alcohol and probably 9, a pH, of under 3 and a titratable acid of about 9.
Yeah.
That wine can stand that. That's, those great Achfelders from that era are amazing. And it was great wine.
It was 6 months later. Okay, let's talk about the Cabernet, please.
Cabernet. So Cabernet is different from the Chardonnay and the Pinot in that the Chardonnay and the Pinot are 100% Chardonnay and 100% Pinot Noir. No other grape in it. Whereas Cabernet is a blend. And that's kind of the tradition that we have in America. We followed the French model where Pinot Noirs and Chardonnay are 100% and Cabernets are blends. And so this Cabernet 2017, a really fantastic vintage in Napa. And, this wine is predominantly Cabernet, but we always have Cabernet Franc in the wine no matter what. And I got to look. This one has 82% Cabernet, 7% Cabernet Franc, 6% Merlot, 3% Petit Verdot, and 2% Malbec. So it has really the 5 basic grapes of Bordeaux in it. And we do that because Cabernet on its own sometimes can be a bit monolithic, a bit heavy and hard. And so, like a chef, sometimes you use 4 or 5 different spices, and that's what we've done here. And what I'm after is that classic Napa Valley smell and taste. We all know what Napa Valley Cabernet smells and tastes like, and that's what I want it to be. And I just smell that wine for the first time, and it smells like Napa Valley Cabernet. And certainly the palate is that, and it's got that Cabernet, strength and power, but it doesn't knock you down. It's not killing you with tannin. It's not drying out every bit of moisture you have in your mouth, but there is tannin in it. I mean, there is a little drying sensation, but there is fruit. There is that oak. There's a little kind of a cedary, toasty oak character to it, but there's a really fun bay leaf kind of thing going on in there too. And it's right on that cusp. Lighter red wines tend to be red fruit oriented. Heavier red wines tend to be black fruit oriented. And this wine for me today is a little more black fruit oriented, but it's not far from that middle stripe of crossover between red and black. And I like the different varietals in there. I think the Cab Franc at 7% is giving it a little bit of that purple violet character. The Merlot is giving it a little dusty plum kind of character. So there's good complexity. And as you said, there's a lot of expensive Cabernets in Napa. And I don't know what you retail this for in your store there. But generally it's about the least expensive Napa Cabernet on the market. And this wine's got some serious complexity and nice richness without killing you in your wallet.
Well, it's $20 in our store, and you're right, it is easily the least expensive. I mean, sometimes we have Charles Krug's Cabernet, it's 25. And another great bang for the buck wine, because again, Napa Valley Cabernet just kind of doesn't exist at that price point. And it's nice carrying Charles Krug wines, because the Mondavis were from here, or they moved to California from here.
Exactly.
That bottle of 59 Armand Rousseau Chambertin, that's a certain kind of wine. And back then, it wasn't horribly expensive.
Comparatively, no,
not at all. It was probably $50 or something like that.
I think it had a $37, $38 price tag on it, which is a senior in high school. I wasn't buying, but one of my dad's buddies gave it to him. And, but at that time too, there weren't a lot of wines that were more than $40, $50. It was really rare. First growth Bordeaux was about $50 at that time, and some of them less than that. And so 37, 38
I was the manager. I was actually still in college, but I was the manager of a really fine French restaurant in Nashville. If you can imagine that there was a really fine French restaurant in Nashville in the early 70s, but there was. And we had all the first growth Bordeaux's on the wine list, but they were $100 on the restaurant wine list for Chateau Latour and Chateau Lafite and Margaux and Mouton.
And today those wines are $4,000 on a wine list. And it's a young vintage that you're really not going to be that interested in drinking. So, but this wine.
The point I was going to make is that's a certain kind of wine. It's an intellectual, contemplative, thought-provoking wine that deserves serious attention. It's not a wine that you should just drink real fast for the buzz,
No.
Partly because there's so little of it, But there's a place for that in the world of wine. It's an important place in the world of wine for wines like that. You mentioned DRC,
yes,
whatever. But there's also a place for just straightforward, delicious wines. And that's exactly what a $20 wine should be. It should be absolutely delicious.
Yeah, because at $20, I mean, I can make these wines at $20 retail for your store, and I make them in the same way, really, that Armand Rousseau Chambertin was made, and that this Cabernet is made in the same way that first growth Bordeaux is made. We ferment them the same way, we age them the same way. There's no, they're not having a trick that I don't have. And so,
I mean, Armand Rousseau Chambertin is aged in 100% new oak, probably Francais or barrels, and those are $3,000 each. And so there is,
right.
And I'm aging they hold 225 liters of wine. So
I'm aging in those same barrels, but I use about 8% new at that expensive price tag, and the rest are used. But I can create that same kind of, or not this exact, but I mean, you can create depth of character without having it have to be that contemplative, expensive thing. But I also don't want, wines. For me, wine is pretty simple. You have a sip, you have a glass, and somewhere in that first glass, it's kind of like the old Siskel and Ebert method. It's either thumbs up or thumbs down, and you don't have to dissect it and talk about it and mention every little nuance that you taste. It's either you like it or you don't like it. And, that's kind of what I'm trying to make here is wines that, after a half a glass or a glass, you're going to say thumbs up. And we all have to be able to drink wines that are the best wines we can drink within our budget. Yep. And, I have a budget. I'm not drinking first growth Bordeaux's and Armand Rousseau anymore. So, I got to find wines that are exciting at my price point. And that's what I'm trying to deliver with Routestock.
I've had 3 people this week ask me for a wet wine. And the first time, I don't even know I don't even know how to respond. I didn't know how to respond.
I'm waiting for your response because I don't know what to say.
They meant not dry.
Oh, not dry. Okay. Wet.
So somewhere on TV, somewhere on TV or on the radio or in a magazine somewhere, someone has referred to a sweet wine as wet. And that has caught on.
Why not? But I thought they were all wet, no matter how much sugar they had in them. But but again, I don't want to make fun of anybody. If it means that to them, great. And I'm sure you have some wonderful examples like that Achfiner Boxting Cabernet that you talked about earlier. That wine is wet.
I think every wine we have is hopefully wet, but some of them are sweet. A few years ago, Dr. Phil or Dr. Oz or one of those guys said on TV that on his TV show that you should be worried if you had gluten issues, you should be careful about what wines you drink because some wines have a lot of glutens. And the next day, everybody that came in the door of my store in Nashville was asking for gluten-free wines. And I would try to explain to them that there's no gluten in wine, and they just thought I was lying.
There is no gluten in wine.
So after about 2 weeks of this, of people leaving because I was trying to tell them the truth, I put up a big sign in the back of the store that said every bottle of wine in the store is gluten-free. We specialize in gluten-free wine.
And people didn't leave, they bought wine.
Yeah. It's really important to remember that the consumer, there's very different levels of sophistication among the consumers, and what they're looking for in a bottle of wine. The guy that buys Rombauer is looking for a very different, or Silver Oak, or Mayomi, or Cake Bread, or Camus, whatever, all those wines, is looking for a different experience than the person that buys, Dujac, Chambolle Musigny. It's just a different.
It's interesting that you bring that up because I am what I would describe as a lazy winemaker. I want to do as little as I can do to those grapes to get them to be good wine. I don't want to manipulate them and force them into something. I don't have Routestock is not a brand like Camus that kind of needs to taste the same every vintage and all the time. Right. And so they're taking grapes and forcing it to be something that grape may not want to be. But those wines like that, they have probably 15 to maybe 20 different ingredients in them.
Correct.
This Cabernet that I'm sitting here drinking from Routestock has 2 ingredients, and that is Cabernet Sauvignon grapes and the other grapes, and SO2, sulfur dioxide, which occurs naturally in fermentation, and we add a little as an antioxidant, but nothing else. There's no chemicals that you can't pronounce. That we deal with only organic grape growers. We're not putting concentrates in like those wines. We're not putting fermentation enhancers and all that in there to do it. This wine doesn't even have commercial yeast in it. I use native, indigenous, wild yeast to ferment all my red wines. The white wines have commercial yeast, so it's grape, yeast, and sulfur dioxide, and that's it. And so I just don't believe in adding all those things to wine to try to make wine chemical. For me, I hate chemistry, and wine, when it goes right, is about 90% artistry and 10% chemistry. When it goes wrong, it's about 90% chemistry and 10% artistry. And so I deal with the healthiest grapes I can deal with, so I don't have to get too chemical. But some of those producers that you just ticked off there, they're trying to create the exact same chemical impression in every wine.
Right.
And that's just not what a grape wants to be. If that grape for me wants to be a ballerina, let it be a ballerina. If it wants to be a football player, let it be a football player. And that's my idea of being a lazy winemaker.
One night at a restaurant, I was the sommelier with a Wine Spectator Grand Award wine cellar, and actually Thomas Keller was the chef before he opened the French Laundry. A customer asked me about 2 different wines. He was contemplating 2 different wines, and he said, "Which one of these do you think I should order?" And I said, "It depends if you prefer Alan Alda or Arnold Schwarzenegger."
Good description.
And he said, "Well, I like both of them. Why don't we have both?" So that turned a $500 sale into a $1,000 sale.
Yeah, there you go. That's
Alan
a great description. I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah, that's an analogy. It translates clearly. One of I do want to not forget to mention one thing. We do have a celebrity on the screen. Jennifer Grote is Allison's mother. So we are very excited that, if I'm not mistaken, I hope I'm right. I don't want to fail to mention that Jennifer, you're Allison's mother, isn't that right? Yeah, so thanks for joining us today. That's really fun.
Yeah.
That's really fun. I just have one more comment, Vance, and then one more comment and one question, and I'll let you go. One of the things that has come up in these conversations over and over and over again, and you just kind of alluded to it, is that great wines are made in the vineyard and only great mistakes are made in the wine cellar. And if you grow the grapes conscientiously, understanding the vagaries of vineyard variations, and stay out of the way and let the wine make itself with a little help along the way, the wine will turn out a lot better than if you try to imprint your personality on it.
Yes, and that's that's what I was just talking about if let a grape be what it wants to be. And I would love to sit here and tell you as a winemaker that we winemakers are responsible for all of the flavor that's in this glass, and we're the ones that created it. And that is just a bunch of hooey. The majority of it is done in the vineyard, because it's just, as I said earlier, I'm a chef, and I can't take a bad piece of meat and make a good dish out of it. Just can't do it. And I can't take a bad grape and make a good wine out of it. Chemistry may help me take a bad grape and make it passable, but it's never going to be good, and it's certainly never going to be great. To have great food and great wine, you have to start with a great raw ingredient. And it's very simple. And that's why we deal with organic grape growers. That's why we're involved in the process year round with our grape growers. And there's so many little things that we do in the vineyard that create the flavor. And then once it gets to the winery, as I said, I'm lazy. I just want to try to stand back and do as little as I can do to get that wine from point A to point B. Because people don't really realize that from grape to wine, is a really short process. Now, it's not the wine that you're used to, finished wine and bottled because it hadn't aged, but it takes about 2 weeks to take a grape and make it wine. And so the things that we do in that 2-week period, they're very important, but they're not as important as what's gone on the last 12 months in the vineyard. And then you have another, depending on the wine, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay age, about 10 or 11 months in the winery before we bottle them. Cabernet about 22 months before we bottle them. And that process is extremely important of how we do it, what we do. But the vast majority of it comes from the vineyard. And without a good raw material, you're not going to have a good dinner tonight. And I'm not going to serve you a good bottle of wine with it.
In about 1975 or 1976, I was the head bartender at a really fine Italian restaurant in New York City called the Sign of the Dove. It was just a fabulous restaurant. One of the most beautiful restaurants ever, I think, in the world. And the maitre d' was Colombian. And one night, the Venezuelan ambassador to the United States came in for dinner, and the maitre d' and the Venezuelan ambassador to the United States got in a fist fight in the dining room during service, and both got arrested.
Oh, God.
And of course, we were on TV. We got a lot of publicity.
I'm sure.
But of course, the maitre d' got fired. And
I can imagine.
He was in charge of the wine program. So the manager of the restaurant asked me if I would go down in the wine cellar and help him figure out what in the world was down there, because this guy had kind of run his own program. And we were going through kind of making notes about, we had this. We didn't have a clue what any of it was. I mean, and it was all, really esoteric Italian wines that nobody had ever heard of. And we found this half bottle of this really beautiful color wine. And he said, do you know what this is? I said, I've never seen anything like that. It's French. It might be
Chateau Yquem.
It was that's the common thread. It was 1950. It was a half bottle of 1959 Chateau Yquem.
Yep.
At that point in my life, my idea of great wine was Lancer's Rosé.
Yeah, that's what we drank back then.
Yeah. But the manager said, well, I don't know what this is worth, but why don't we find out what it's like? And we opened it and drank it. 1959 Chateau Yquem.
I've had the wine. It's amazing.
This is 50 years ago, and I remember what it tasted like.
Yeah.
It was unlike your 59 Chambertin. It was.
I still can taste that wine today.
It was life-changing.
Yeah.
That's what got me interested in wine originally, was that half bottle of Sauterne.
And usually most of us that are geeky about this stuff and do it for a living you can trace it back to one seminal moment. And I was born in 59, so I've had the 59 Yquem a few times, and that is one of the great wines that I've ever had. I love it.
Yeah. I was talking to a customer about Chateau Yquem earlier today, about how when you give it some age, it becomes this. It's sweet, but it's so much more than that.
Well, it's such a great transformation, because it starts out darker than white wine, a little more golden than white wine. And then as it ages, it goes, from that to more golden. And then it takes on a kind of a Irish setter, kind of goldy red. And then as it gets older, it goes all the way to coffee. And it truly has that color of coffee. And you think, God, this can't be any good. And you drink it, and it's the most amazing nectar in a glass you've ever had. And, red wine brightens a little in color, but that doesn't transform like those Sauternes do.
Have you ever tasted 1921 Chateau Yquem?
I have one time, probably the greatest vintage of Yquem in its history, and
1870 and 1921.
Right. Yeah. And
we had several at that restaurant where Thomas was the chef. We had quite a few bottles of 21.
Yeah,
And if you
21
taste
was,
it, you know,
was
it looks like motor oil.
it does. It
It
has that
actually
dark,
looks like motor oil poured into a glass. And then you
yeah,
taste it and it is just ethereal nectar of the gods.
yeah. You can't imagine how something that weird and ugly looking can taste that good.
It
But
looks
you know,
like something
that's
you should
true.
pour
I
in your
had
coffee.
a bottle of Burgundy years ago, but it was a 1966 Domaine Marimonge Burgundy, and poured it, and it looked like rosé. I mean, maybe darkish rosé, but rosé. And I thought, oh, this wine isn't any good, and tasted it, and it was just explosive with flavor and had so much to it. And it taught me that red wines don't have to be dark to be good.
That was the Romanée Saint Vivant, probably. Right?
Yeah, yeah. Romanée Saint
Right,
Vivant,
right.
Domaine Marimonge, kind of
Yeah.
as DRC was taking
Right.
it over.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, 66, great, again, a great Burgundy vintage.
Great vintage. Yeah, I've been lucky, come on. So have you.
Well, you know, I don't know what you do if the first great wine you ever taste is 59 Rousseau Chambertin. It's all downhill from there.
Yeah, but it's been a damn good downhill ride. Come on.
You're like Jean-Claude Keely, great.
Exactly. I am Jean-Claude Keely going down as fast as I
You're
can.
going down fast, but you're going past those gates with great applause.
I love Jean-Claude Keely, and I love drinking those wines.
Yeah. Well, Vance, thank you so much. This has been
Well,
fantastic.
yeah, thank you. I really appreciate
it.
it. I appreciate you letting me come on and talk about rootstock. It's something that I really love. I love making these wines. I'm dedicated to bringing as much flavor in that bottle as I can to your customers. So I hope they enjoy it. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
wonderful weekend. Jennifer, Allison's parents, Jennifer and Mr. Jennifer, thank you for joining us today.
Ron,
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks.
Rootstock is good.
we
We
love
love it.
Rootstock.
Rootstock's good.
Thank you.
Your
Thank
daughter
you.
Allison is very, very important to us. We are blessed by our relationship with her.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Does a
you.
Wonderful job for
We
She's
love
a-
her too.
we
We're
love
glad you
experiences today.
She's awesome.
Hey, good luck in the baseball game. I hope your son goes 4 for 4 and drives in 3 runs.
Exactly.
He will.
Hope
He
so.
will.
Good,
We're on our way. I'm here.
If he's good enough and smart enough, someday I'll introduce him to the coach at Vanderbilt University, and he can win the
Ooh,
national
whoa.
championship in
Good.
college baseball 2 times in his 3-year career there.
Big time. Love it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Have
you.
a good
Appreciate
day.
it. Very fun.